Namaskar and welcome to our session of critical lines today. So this is the podcast we have started, and this is the second episode, and it'll be every Wednesday, lasting 20 minutes, starting 7:30. And in this, we invite leading experts from our country who will give their opinion on burning issues, important issues in critical care. So today we have a very important faculty. Ma'am is Professor Rakhi Maiwal. In fact, she had taken a session for us around 1.5 years ago on ascites and SBP, and it's uploaded on our channel, and many of you have viewed it also. So, ma'am is Professor of Hepatology at the Institute of Liver and Biliary Sciences, New Delhi, and she's also in charge of the Liver Intensive Care Unit, which is primarily why she's here with us today. It's her area of interest, and she specializes in this. She's also the Vice Secretary of the International Club of Ascites. She's Associate Editor of Hepatology International and also member of the editorial board of the Liver Transplantation Journal. And she has a very distinguished career, winning several awards and also the recent prestigious APSL Rising Star Award. And she has around 138 publications, so really a very distinguished career. And she's a liver intensivist also, so it'll be great to hear from her. We really won't be taking any questions, but if there is just a couple of questions, we may take it if ma'am has the time. So, ma'am, if we start with the first point to discuss, can you highlight the recent advances in critical care hepatology in the last 2, 3 years?
Yeah, so there have been tremendous advancements, I can say. So I can subdivide the section into what kind of patients we usually see in the intensive care unit in a liver ICU. So, with respect to acute on chronic liver failure patients, critically ill patients who have septic shock, or they come with sepsis or multi organ failure. And the third group, which is a very important group and the most important group for us, is acute liver failure. So what I'll do is I'll leave behind decompensated cirrhosis with complications because we can discuss it subsequent in different headings, but different questions. And what I would like to say in acute liver failure, there has been recent advances in the way we understand ALF, we manage ALF, and we assess ALF. So in acute liver failure, we know that these patients predominantly they have liver failure which drives cerebral edema, and that is a sinister complication. So there have been recent advances in how we understand cerebral edema, how we monitor it, and how do we use these extracorporeal therapies for the management of ALF patients with cerebral edema. So in the intensive care in acute liver failure, we see that we have moved to the point of care ultrasound guided optic nerve sheet diameter assessments. We are doing transcranial Doppler assessments for cerebral edema. Previously, people were doing intracranial pressure, putting transducers, but that was associated with so many complications. So now we have moved to this. Then ammonia targeted therapy, monitoring ammonia, dynamic assessment of ammonia, and also using plasma exchange. Again, conceptually, we're using plasma exchange as a high volume. We can use standard volume or low volume plasma exchange, and early introduction of continuous renal replacement therapy, which we preferably use CVVHDF in these patients, early antibiotics, aggressive protocols in the ICU. And particularly when you are seeing these patients with viral related ALF, we've seen very good outcomes, and now our survival rates short of liver transplant in the patients who had cerebral edema initially was almost 50% mortality, has improved to 70 to 80% survival with patients who have cerebral edema with the use of these strategies of dynamic monitoring and also assessment and management aggressive in the ICU. The second important area is acute on chronic liver failure. Acute and chronic liver failure, again, we have different definitions, and I do not know outside hepatology how do people understand. But basically, acute and chronic liver failure, we need to identify as patients who have background chronic liver disease, were never known to have prior decompensated cirrhosis. They may be having compensated cirrhosis of unknown etiology, and they get an acute insult. So this acute insult is basically can be viral, it can be alcohol, it can be drugs, it can be anything. It can be also infections. Again, it is very debatable, but we do see even sepsis-driven liver failure. But whatever is the acute insult, there is rapid onset of organ failure. So in these patients, there is rapidity of development of jaundice, coagulopathy. So rapid development into organ failures. These patients quickly die of infections and multi-organ failure, and these patients need a liver transplant. So what is important for us to understand is for ACLF also, there have been different ways of how we manage these patients, how we assess, what prognostic models we use in the intensive care unit. Early identification for liver transplant expedited, even for patients in a select set of patients with alcohol-related ACLFs. So very careful selection of the patients, use of extracorporeal therapies early on, to ameliorate cytokine storm, systemic inflammation, and prevent the development of infections, and also ameliorate the improve the liver regeneration, and also consider futility, because that is another very important thing, which is important in these patients of ACLF, because if they do not get a timely liver transplant, there is no point managing them in the intensive care unit because it is very resource intensive. So futility models, assessment of these patients for dynamic assessment, management of separate organ failures, understanding which organ failure cannot be taken up for liver transplant, and there have been different scores for that. So all this has improved, and when we are managing any of these patients, the important advancements again is how we understand the hemodynamics and the fluid assessment protocol. So we can discuss that. So fluid assessment is something which is extremely important for our patients, and liver patients are the most difficult because none of the parameters that we use in the general critically ill population will work. They may have 10 societies which may limit the assessment of IVC and the collapsibility. They may have these patients already having fluid in the interstitial space, so it's very difficult to assess the volume. Again, they're effectively hypovolemic, and very rapidly they develop kidney injury. So it is very important how you make a good assessment of the hemodynamics and fluid. And again, in this setting, we have moved to an area where we are using now more and more fluid management. There is no more fixed protocols. Obviously, we use albumin in combination, but again, crystalloids, particularly balanced crystalloids, have been recommended for the management of these patients. And we can use albumin in combination, 20 to 25%, along with plasmalite or a balanced crystalloid, or we can use 5% albumin. Because if you're dealing with patients with cirrhosis, at least from our center in 2 RCTs, we have shown that you have to use albumin along with your crystalloids, because crystalloids will all leak when they're used in isolation in these patients. And in many patients, you may even not require crystalloids, where there is no shock, where there is no extra need of fluid. So there, using a lung ultrasound assessment, a B-line protocol to look at the fluid assessment and IVC diameter and collapsibility. Now, all the algorithms for kidney management and shock management in patients with cirrhosis have moved to these assessment of these patients with cirrhosis with dynamic protocols rather than using fixed dose of albumin. That was there initially. And when we're using terlipressin, again, there has been advancement. There is a revision in the definition of hepatorenal syndrome. I would recommend everyone to read the JHEP guidelines proposed by the International Club of Ascites and the Acute Dialysis and Quality Initiative Group. And we have proposed guidelines for the management of kidney in the context of ACLF, where clearly we have recommended that no more we should be waiting for 48 hours for understanding which patients need vasoconstrictors, make an assessment early on in the disease course after an appropriate volume expansion. And very important is now we're proposing more and more to use a continuous infusion of terlipressin, which is better than bolus dosages, associated with lesser side effects, and also requires lesser dosages for improvement of the kidney functions. So if you have any other sepsis, again, we have so many things. And Dr. Tapesh, you can ask the next. If
Sure,
anything
ma'am.
else you would like to ask in this.
That's great, ma'am. Wonderful. So moving on to the next point, ma'am, we have these patients. You work in a liver setup, so you see all the liver complications. But we get patients with all kinds of diseases, ARDS,
Mhm.
polytrauma,
Yeah, yeah.
acute kidney injury, and they have underlying CLD. And
Mhm.
CLD may be mild or decompensated. So, what special considerations should we have, in dealing with these patients pertaining to the liver involvement and dealing with ARDS or polytrauma separately?
Yeah. So I would say any disease means if you're dealing with a compensated cirrhosis and other complications, still it is still manageable, but we have to be extra cautious because decompensated cirrhosis and when you have other diseases, it's very important because a lot of things are determined by the liver itself, which are altered in patients with sepsis. For instance, when you say ARDS, there is fluid in the lungs. Patients with liver disease already have pleural effusions, they have coagulation, supposing platelet count. So, how do we understand whether this platelet is because of the primary disease for which the patient has got admitted or it is a result of the underlying liver disease? So, whatever abnormalities that we get in different organ systems, it is very important that we look at it very closely because if we are looking at some important parameters like coagulation, volume assessment, how we use the vasoconstrictors, which vasopressor, inotropic agents. So, understanding the hemodynamics, fluid assessment, antibiotics, even kidneys, whether it is congestive kidney, which is more often seen in other settings as compared to hepatorenal. So, you will have to use different ways of managing these patients, different protocols, understanding if the liver is diseased. We have to be extra careful because if we lose the synthetic functions of the liver during this process, then obviously the outcomes get very worse because you cannot bring these patients back. And with the deranged, the worsening of the liver failure function. So if the bilirubin starts rising in these patients, then it's like a point of no return because you cannot go back on that. So all these subtle things becomes very, very important in the context of patients with cirrhosis.
Yeah. Thank you, ma'am. So, moving on to the next point, ma'am, kindly give your opinion on a CLD patient who's presenting with septic shock in terms of the diagnosis and management.
Yeah. So, septic shock is a very important area. And I could say that we can divide our patients of liver disease, how we have advanced in the context of septic shock is the early septic shock. So, first setting is sepsis induced hypertension. So, I briefly mentioned about the protocols of volume resuscitation. So, once we have done an appropriate volume resuscitation, what we propose is that we do not wait for those 3 hours. Most of the times, we would have to use norepinephrine early on in patients with cirrhosis because you have these patients who are already very severely vasodilated. And when you're giving volume, you have to be extra cautious that you do not flood these patients. So, dynamic assessment, quick use of vasopressors, norepinephrine as the first choice, which we also propose. But again, different schools of thought believe that we can add the second vasopressor in context of patients with cirrhosis. We can consider terlipressin, but again, terlipressin, we have to be extra cautious. You should be knowing that your patient is not having very severe septic shock. Very low dose of terlipressin can be tried in patients we are suspecting a good urine output and you can improve the hemodynamics, but very careful monitoring of side effects in early septic shock. In patients who have severe septic shock, we recommend vasopressin as a second vasoconstrictor in these patients. Early use of hydrocortisone early on. Again, vasopressin, as compared to other patients, we would suggest that we should not wait for the patient's norepinephrine to go beyond, and you should consider early on vasopressin in the clinical course. Antibiotics, again, has to be very appropriately chosen because whatever we choose in the first hour, it is better to de-escalate the antibiotics. And particularly in patients with cirrhosis, if you're dealing with nosocomial infections, in hospital infections, it is better to cover and hit early and hit hard in these patients with antibiotics and follow a de-escalation protocol. If you're dealing with the infections like SBP, it is better to also consider empirical antifungals, or also in septic shock, we usually cover them with antifungals as well empirically for all these patients. And when we look at the patients target map protocols, so we have published from our center that in patients, because in the data in the general critically ill has suggested that low map 60 to 65 is as good as 80 to 85. So what we showed in this randomized control trial from our center was that, like we assess fluid responsiveness, we should assess vasopressor responsiveness. So if your patient is having, if you give vasopressors, like if you've added second vasopressor and there's an improvement in MAP, a higher MAP means 70, 75, and even maybe up to 80 is better. But it is not that we should start pumping in vasopressors to achieve that target MAP. So because that is associated with adverse events. So in that set of patients, a 65 to 70 target is enough. And terlipressin again had more adverse events. So that was few messages from that. And patients who have achieved this vasopressor response and have a recovery in the hemodynamics, these are the ones who also get AKI recovery, and they also get, so how early we are able to achieve our targets will influence the outcomes of these patients. So earlier we're able to achieve a hemodynamic response, earlier is the better is the prognosis of these patients. So that is one thing. And then when we are looking at cardiac dysfunction, so we do see hypodynamic shock also, but it is very rare. More often that we see, if we see patients with liver disease, more often what we see is a vasoplegic shock. So very low SVRs. These are very difficult to high output heart failure patients. So hyperdynamic circulatory state. So in such patients, we have seen that lactate measurement is also very important, and it is not the initial lactate or lactate clearances. And we've shown that if we are able to improve the lactate clearance by 15 to 20% at 6 hours, this is an independent predictor of good outcomes. While if you're not able to achieve the lactate clearance, it is a very poor marker. And particularly if you're not having any lactate clearance, despite all measures, we should be knowing that these patients, whatever, even if they are good now, so cryptic shock patients, so even the hemodynamics are good, we will see that these patients have worse outcomes. That is one thing. With respect to SVR measurement and cardiac index measurement, there are studies which have shown that if we can improve the systemic vascular resistance by 15%, it is almost 80% sensitive and specific to say that we have achieved an appropriate hemodynamic response in patients with cirrhosis. Refractory shock is a very difficult situation when we deal with patients, especially of liver disease. So I would suggest what we do in our center is to correct any acid base, calcium. We use phenylephrine as a third vasopressor. We also consider adrenaline, if at all, we can give. And if there is a cardiac inotropic need, we never use dobutamine until and unless there is a clear cardiac dysfunction, because that is associated with very rapid worsening of SVR. Levosimendan also should never be used until and unless we are dealing with a hypodynamic clear-cut shock, cardiogenic shock in patients with cirrhosis. Thiamine high dose, vitamin C we have shown is good, methylene blue, and CRRT for hemodynamic support and heme adsorption therapies are something which we use as strategies for managing refractory shock.
Lovely, ma'am. Thank you so much for that wonderful rendition on septic shock. Lots of details and lots of takeaway. So moving on, ma'am, we would like to know about hyponatremia. So in decompensated CLD, you get hyponatremia. When and how should we treat this hyponatremia, ma'am? And is it really a troublesome thing? You know, patients have hepatic encephalopathy at times. You don't know what is what.
Yeah. So hyponatremia, I would say that it is frequently present in patients with decompensated cirrhosis, but it is not necessary that we chase the serum sodium levels for all patients. But like you said, so what we need to see is, one is the severity of hyponatremia, the rapidity in which it has developed. So the decline in the serum sodium in some patient. So maybe a decline of maybe somebody was 135 and goes to 125. So most of the times we see in refractory ascites, there is chronic hyponatremia and the serum sodium may vary from 123 to 125 and the patient is asymptomatic. There we do not need to chase the sodium values. It is more often how you improve, because most often they will have these ascites. So how you mobilize the fluid will improve the serum sodium. But sodium itself becomes very important in the setting where there is acute drop. It is severe, less than 120. It is associated with symptoms. Or if the patient has means very severe, requiring means renal replacement therapy, then you have to correct. So what we do in our setting, the first strategy that we assess is whether the patient, because many very often you see also hypovolemic hyponatremia. So how do we determine clinically is these patients will be very dry, they will be on diuretics, over diuresed. So in that setting, we have to correct the hyponatremia by giving normal saline or the fluid or albumin therapy. But if you have a euvolemic or hypervolemic, which is more common, so after ruling out all the other causes, like routine causes, hypothyroidism, adrenal dysfunction, drugs, like sometimes lactulose can cause this, other drugs, means diuretics, so all these drugs and checklist has to be done. After we've ruled all causes, what we need to do is we have to start these patients on albumin. It is better to measure urinary spot sodium or a sodium excretion to understand whether the patient is effectively losing or able to lose the sodium. Then we can add drugs like, if the patient has low MAP, we can add drugs like terlipressin or means midodrine in the patients who are less sick. Oral midodrine can be added or norepinephrine. Target MAP has to be maintained and urinary sodium excretion has to be improved so that the free water excretion is improved. Now, when you have to rapidly correct because if the patient is waiting for a liver transplant, so you need a quick correction. In that setting, if the patient has normal renal functions, obviously diuretics can be used. So when you have a normal renal function and your diuretics and you have to mobilize the fluid, tolvaptan is something can be used. But the checklist is the patient should not have any kidney dysfunction, patient should not be in hepatic encephalopathy, rapid correction of sodium should not be done. So patient should be conscious and should be allowed to drink a lot of water. So we can give Vaptans to correct the sodium in that setting. But in very sick patients where you're planning, it is better to consider continuous renal replacement therapy. And if we cannot use your renal replacement also because the serum sodiums are very low, only in that setting we advocate giving a 3% normal saline to build up the sodium and then start renal replacement therapy.
So, wonderful, ma'am. So, just a point about Vaptins. So, what
Yeah.
about the safety of Vaptins in the setting
So
of?
Vaptans, I would say these are very good drugs, but not for the intensive care unit patients. So intensive care, we have to be very selective with set of patients. So like I said, very often these patients will have, along with fluid, this hyponatremia, if they have AKI. These patients should not be given. So worsening AKI. So if it's a resolving AKI, yes, we can go. And better, we normally add Vaptans with diuretics, and the patient should be well alert to drink a lot of water. And the mean arterial pressure has to be maintained. Only then your Vaptans will be effective. The dose also is something because tolvaptan is what is available and that we are using. So dose, what we use is a very small dose. So the worse is the liver function, the smaller is the dose of Vaptans that should be used because the complications, it has a black box warning with higher dosages, what is recommended for heart failure and CHF and kidney failure patients. So what we recommend is 7.5 mg. You monitor the weight, you see patient is diuresing, increase it to 15 mg and never we go beyond 15 mg. And then daily monitoring of fluid status and weight charting can tell us whether we are effectively losing, we are getting the free water clearance, and we are able to achieve the improvement in hyponatremia. So it's a very effective drug, and we particularly use in context of refractory ascites, hydrothoraces in the ICU. So not very sick patients, but yes, recovering and stable patients with hemodynamics, we can use obviously in the ICU also.
Thank you, ma'am. So, just now, last point, ma'am. Could you talk about the role of zinc? Zinc in hepatic encephalopathy and
Yeah,
liver.
so zinc is something which has been actually theoretically, yes, there is a lot of literature supporting that there is zinc deficiency in these patients because of malnutrition, inflammation, a lot of other factors, muscle mass, and it is zinc is an important cofactor for different cycles, the urea cycle, so it modulates the ammonia. And also in the muscle, it is required for the, so it is, what people propose is that it should be supplemented with branched chain amino acids because it improves the glutamine synthetase function in the muscle. But as such, we are not very sure of. So it's not that every prescription should include zinc. So we should look into the deficiency symptoms, and if there's a strong suggestion. So obviously, what we suggest in a malnourished patient with cirrhosis who's sarcopenic, it is better to give multivitamins because most of the times these patients do not eat properly. They have gut edema, wall edema, they have poor appetite. So it's better to give in some form, but it is not something that means a lot of evidence is there existing in the benefits of zinc replacement in patients with cirrhosis.
Thank you, ma'am. That's wonderful.
Thank
So I think, ma'am, that was the last point, and we have come to the end of our session. It was lovely hearing from you, ma'am. Lots of takeaways, and I'm sure the audience would have loved it. And we'll be putting this up on our channel. So,
you.
ma'am,
Okay.
looking forward to having you again on our platform sometime. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr.